I'm going to show you from ground zero, knowing nothing about tinting, how I learned to tint every single shape and size of window. And if I'm able to do it, then you're able to do it too. And you might even make a more successful business out of it than I did. So let's get started. We're going to start with the easiest and move up to the hardest windows to tint. The order will be side framed windows first, and rear quarter windows, then frameless side windows, and then finally front and rear windshields. Timestamps in the description. In terms of tint, I got 35% VLT tint. VLT stands for visible light transmission, which means the lower the percentage, the less you can see through. 35% is the darkest I can go in my state, and I still think it looks pretty good, so we're gonna stick with that. In terms of tools, the minimum that you're going to need is some sort of card or squeegee, a stainless steel blade, a spray bottle, and a thin piece of plastic that you can pull back the window seals with. So now it's time to get a sheet of tint on the window. Two ways you can do this. You can one, spray some water down and then roll the tint right onto the window, or the second way, which I like a little better, is to measure the length and the width of the window and then cut 1 to 2 inches longer than that. This way you don't have to deal with all the excess tint from the roll. Next up, get your spray bottle and put a little bit of Dawn dish soap in, then fill it up with water and give it a quick mix. What this will do is allow your tint to tack on to the window while also being able to slide it around and position it due to the soap. Spray the window as much as you want, the more the better. And we're just going to lay the tint on there. All right, so this guy that I'm watching on YouTube says with frames on the side of your windows, it might be easier to mark it with a Sharpie and then cut it with scissors. Now, this is the first thing out of many that I regret doing here. Do not mark your tint with a Sharpie. When you mark it with a Sharpie and then cut it out with scissors, the cut is not going to be exact. As long as you have stainless steel blades, you are not going to cut the glass with your knife. So just use that. No need for this extra step. Now, as I did not know that yet, I continue on trying to cut this piece. One big issue here. There's a ton of excess tint on the side, so the sheet is not laid out very nicely at all on the window. And it's important to cut the sides out first and make sure the tint is laying perfectly flat when you cut the top, because the top is the main edge you're going to line the tint up with, so it needs to be perfect. And you can see down by the mirror the same issue is there. And in a couple minutes I realized that that whole section is all wrinkled and I can't use the tint. Alright, so I was trying to finish the tint and this happens. So now it's time for the second attempt. I laid the tint out on the window and I started cutting with the sides. Most importantly, cutting all the excess tint near the mirror so it doesn't get bunched up. So now I roll the window down ever so slightly so I can cut the top. When making these cuts, make sure to have the side of the blade completely parallel against the glass. That'll make for the best cut and will make sure you don't scratch your glass. So for only my second attempt, I think the cuts are actually pretty good. So before applying the tint, I made sure to spray the inside glass with this soapy water to clean it. You can use either a squeegee or I'm using my card here. Just wipe down the glass and then take a clean microfiber towel and dry it off. I do want to say, when spraying the inside glass with the soapy water, I did not put any towels down. The window seal is technically supposed to limit the amount of water that gets into the internals on the door panel, but it's good to be safe rather than sorry, especially if you're working on someone else's car. But later on in the video, I do tint both rear and front windshields, and there are usually exposed speakers underneath those windshields. So those are instances where you need to put towels down, and I made sure to put towels down in those instances as well. So now with that PSA out of the way, I sprayed the outside of my tint and then laid it on the inside of the glass. Now you may have noticed I completely forgot to do something very, very important, and this is really embarrassing. But because you're learning with me right now, I'm going to tell you, you're welcome. I was trying to tint this window without removing the film that was covering the adhesive. So I squeegeed it down completely on the inside and it wasn't going to stick. So yeah, the next morning it looked like that. So now it's time for my successful attempt. I sprayed the outside of the window and tacked the sheet on. I then got my blade and started cutting the sides of the tint out. And then I went to the bottom and cut that out with a little bit of overhang. And then I got to something called shrinking the film. It's essentially where you use a heat gun in order to smooth out and flatten the tint. Based on my experience, smaller windows like these don't necessarily need to be shrunk too much, where in comparison, larger frameless windows and windshields I definitely need to shrink. And this is good because I'm shrinking the film very badly. You want to point the heat gun at any bubbles you see and wait for the bubbles to disperse horizontally before swiping them down with your card or squeegee. You'll get a better idea and more tips on how to shrink if you go to the windshield section of this video. So now I remember to take off the film and then spray the inside of the glass and the adhesive part of the film with soapy water. I make sure the window is cracked before I line up the edge of the film with the edge of the glass. Then I can roll the window up and squeegee out to the bottom. If there are any spots that are giving you trouble or any bubbles that keep reappearing after you have all of your tint flat, what you can can do is take your heat gun and lightly heat it up from the inside and then try and scrape it down. And then whether or not you have bubbles, you should do this as well. Take your heat gun to the outside of the glass and just heat it up for a while. It'll speed up the adhesion process of the tint and make it look very nice. So with that, I just took a microfiber towel and some Rain-X and cleaned the window. So here's the tint finished out in the sunlight, or not really direct sunlight, but yeah, it looks pretty good. So I did the exact same thing on the other side window, and now I have one more car to do, so I'll do this one in a form of an ordered recap. First, spray water on the outside glass, then take your sheet of tint that you cut out and place it on the glass. I then squeegeed as much as I could down so it would lay as flat as possible. I then got to cutting the outer side of the tint, still using the card to push the tint into the edges to keep it as flat as possible. I then did the inner corner by the mirror and then cut the bottom of the tint, making sure to leave a little bit of overhang with the window rolled fully up. I then lowered the window a little bit so I could cut out the top. I then heated the rest of the bubbles out. The bubbles were really small here, so you can't really see, but I just held my heat gun there until they went horizontal and then scraped them off. And now it's time to peel the film off. Let's spray the inside glass with our soapy water, take the card, move it around a little bit, and then dry it up with a towel, and then spray the adhesive part of the tint you already left uncovered. Make sure the window is rolled down and line up the top of the tint with the top of the window. Now push all the bubbles out of the top half and then roll the window up. Then you can squeegee out the bottom half easier. Now when dealing with this extra tint on the bottom, I'm taking my thin spatula here, pulling back the seal, and then using my card to push the tint in. Oh yeah, I forgot my camera died here. Let's just speed up this process real quick for the other window here. Wow, it's so fast. So now waiting for the gunshots to end. We can get back to pulling back the seal and then taking the card and shoving the tint in that gap. When doing it, always start at one of the two corners on the bottom and then work your way either to the left or the right, and that'll give you the best results. And as you're doing it, if it's a little long in some parts, it's easy enough to just take the blade and cut it off. You want extra film to go past the seal so it doesn't get wrinkled at the bottom, but you also know you have too much tint at the bottom when you're trying to push it past the seal and it keeps getting stuck and bunched up together. And finally, I just took some Rain-X and a microfiber towel and cleaned off the windows. And any small bubbles, make sure to heat them up and scrape them down real quick from both the inside and the outside, and you're good to go. So I lied to you, this rear quarter window is actually much easier to do than the front side windows. The only reason I said the front side windows were easier was because I feel like most people are coming to this video to learn how to tint those, since on most cars those aren't tinted from the factory. So I need to be a YouTuber for a second and kind of get like a little hook going. Literally all you need to do is cut out a sheet that's approximately the same size as the window, and on the inside there will typically be very thick gaps that you can slide the edges of the tint into, so you really don't need to cut the tint out to perfection here. And also, since you're working with a very small piece of tint, you most likely won't even need to shrink it. I didn't have to shrink this piece, and this piece has zero imperfections. And of course, once you got it all laid out and tucked into the corners using your card and your spatula, then just squeegee away the bubbles and you're good to go. I believe frameless side windows are probably easier than windows with frames, but the Q60 here proved otherwise for me. When you open the door, the glass slides down just a little bit, and that's a completely normal thing for frameless windows to do that I just completely forgot about. So that means the tint just did not cover the full window. The other thing is that this window seal is super tight. I could not slide the tint in, so this attempt didn't go smoothly either, but I'll show you how I dealt with that here. Thing right here, press it, there it goes, the window's up, and it goes down. We're gonna tape that so it stays up, and then we can properly do the window without having to open and close it. So here I'm taping up the button so the window stays up, and with that we can tint it the same way we've tinted all the other side windows at this point. Get your sheet laid down with some soapy water behind it, and then go to the outside edge and cut that side first. You can cut along the top before cutting the inside near the mirror because it's frameless, so it's much easier to do the top first. And that's because we don't need to roll the window up and down. Since this is a bigger sheet and it's not laying flat, we gotta shrink it a little bit. For the best results shrinking, if you're doing the top, slide the tint down so it's not on the edge of the glass, and that way when you shrink the film it won't curl over the edge of the glass. It'll lay completely flat. You can do the same thing with the bottom by moving the tint up, and then the same thing with the sides. While I was shrinking, the window popped down again, so I got a heavier broom and put that in instead. Now let's take the adhesive cover off and put it on. I sprayed down the inside of the glass, making sure to cover the speaker on the far right, and then lined up the top of the tint with the top of the glass. I then got to scraping. Now to deal with the bottom and the extremely tight seal on this window, window, I made sure to get the top of the tint as flat as possible and go over it a couple times with the squeegee, wait a couple minutes so it's perfectly adhered. I then started on the outside left corner. I pulled a little bit of the seal back with my yellow spatula and then took the card and shoved the tint through that gap. And then what you want to do from here is keep pulling back the seal as you move to the right and keep pushing the tint downwards and to the right towards the inside of the door panel. This will make sure the tint lays flat, because if you try doing the left side corner of the tint and then try doing the right side corner of the tint and then go towards the middle, you're going to create a big air bubble. You want to push it out towards the edges to ensure the tint lays perfectly flat and won't get caught when you're lowering and raising the window. Now that the tint is all applied, I'm cleaning off the door panel here and cleaning off the glass. And then there's something I show briefly after doing the passenger side door here that is also essential, especially when dealing with frameless windows. Since the glass on a frameless window pops down every time you open the door, these windows get rolled down twice as many times as your standard car door, which means to ensure this window tint stays completely flat against the glass, especially near the bottom close to the window seal, you have to heat the outside of the glass with the heat gun so the film adheres way faster and you're less likely to get those air bubble fingers that pop up from the bottom. Here I'm heating up the right side of the glass and it's looking great and it's laying flat. On the bottom left corner here, you can see these bubbles popping up. If those happen, keep pushing the tint down and heating up the outside of the glass. They will lay flat eventually. So now let's tint the front windshield. We're back on the Cadillac ATS here, and first what we're going to do is mask up the windshield. I'm just using some Scotch painter's tape here, and I'm lining the edge of the tape up with the very edge of the windshield where all of those dots on the very corners are. The purpose of this is to, one, be able to see the edges of the windshield better through the tint, and two, to make sure you don't scratch up any of the glass just to be safe. Next, I'm going to spray the windshield with the soapy water mixture, and then just roll the tint right onto the windshield. I picked up the sheet and put it back down just to get rid of this really big bubble on the right and make it a little bit smoother. And then with it as flat as possible, I started from the middle going outwards, squeegeeing all the bubbles. It's easier to get the bubbles out from the edges than to get the bubbles out from the middle. Now let's start on one of the sides of the windshield, and any of the big air bubbles that are sticking out of the sides, we want to take our card and slowly push them down to the bottom. When it comes to the windshields, because these are very large sheets of tint, make sure to take your time so you don't wrinkle anything. It can be really annoying when you flatten out the entire sheet and you make one small mistake and you have to throw out the entire thing. But yeah, just keep pushing the bubbles to the bottom. You want all of the bubbles on the side to be at the bottom of the tint, because then when you heat it up and shrink the film, the bubbles will go horizontally and it'll allow you to flatten out the tint better. Now it's time to cut the tint along the edge of the painter's tape. Once you're done with your cut, take off the tape underneath where you cut. It's necessary to do that because otherwise the tint is not going to lay flat against the windshield because of the ridge from having the tape on the windshield. It's just not going to work. Now we're going to move to the other side. We're cutting off a little bit of the excess, then squeegeeing the fingers down and moving them to the bottom or the top, and then we're cutting perfectly along the line of the tape before removing it and squeegeeing this side completely flat. Now that I have my sides flat, I'm going to the bottom and I'm making the final cuts and removing the tape so the tint can lay flat. Now before I start shrinking the film, I'm going to combine all the smaller air bubbles here with my card, so we only have two semi-big air bubbles to deal with. Now comes shrinking the air bubbles. So we're going to start at the top, we're going to heat it up until the bubbles become horizontal lines, and then we can scrape them parallel to the edge of the tint, push them out, kind of like waves rolling in on a beach. Make sure you take this very slow. If there happens to be a bubble that you can't push out and it becomes perpendicular to the way your card is pushing, then it's very easy to get a crease. The other thing is, the closer you get to the edge of the tint, the more heat you're going to have to use to push it flat. I don't know why this is, but the corners seem to be the hardest part to get flat. So just heat it, be patient, and you'll be good to go. I'm now finishing up on the top, doing the exact same thing I did on every other side, except it's a little bit more complicated on the top since I have the front camera sensors and the rear view mirror, but I got it all done, and here is what it looks like after all of the cuts and shrinking. So now it's time to move the tint to the inside of the windshield. I'm going to spray the inside of the windshield here with soapy water, but not before I put down towels all over the top of the dashboard. There's a lot of speakers, a lot of electronics, and a lot of surface area for the water and soap to get onto, so it's essential that you cover this area with towels. After spraying the water and soap, I'm now taking the squeegee and kind of going over the entirety of the windshield with it, scraping off all these thin layers of dirt and buildup before I then take a towel, wipe it all down, and spray more water again. Now I'm going to take the adhesive cover off, spray the sticky part with a ton of soapy water, and then I got my sister to help me pick up the tint since it's a very large sheet. I didn't want to wrinkle it. We sat down on the seat and put even more soapy water on the inside before finally beginning to install it. We made sure to start with the bottom of the windshield, sliding the tint into place there. I find it best if you start with the bottom because the water starts to dry up quickly and the adhesive starts to stick, and if you need to add more water to reposition it, it's much easier to pull the tint off from the top than from the bottom. With this set in the approximate right position, I just get my squeegee out and start going to town. And that's it. As long as you're patient and you take the proper time to perfect the tint on the outside of the windshield, laying it on the inside will go super smoothly. Now it's time to start doing the rear windshield on the Infiniti Q60. This one is 100% the worst window to tint. It's so big and it's so hard to get back in there. It's really tight in the rear seats of this car. You may notice I didn't mask off the windshield or put any painter's tape down. I actually tried tinting this rear windshield before I did the front windshield of my car that you just saw, and I tried to wing it here, and I learned the hard way that if you try cutting the tint in the gaps between the windshield and the body panels, you'll have way too much excess tint and it's all going to bunch up and crease and you're not going to get a smooth tint. I just wanted to highlight this because if you do what I'm doing here right now, this is not going to work. So we're scrapping this and we're going to start again. So here we are masking up the windshield, and then I got the soapy water spray bottle, spray it down, and then roll the tint over it. And then I'm cutting out the edges here, and then we're getting right into shrinking the film. Now because I was still working with this windshield for like the second time here, this was before I did the front windshield, I want to highlight a couple of mistakes I made while shrinking this film because shrinking is so important. See the big air bubble fingers coming horizontally from the two side edges? You cannot do this because if you try and shrink them in this position, it's not going to go well. You again have to slide the fingers down to the bottom just by gently moving the air and pushing them towards the bottom, not by shrinking it with the heat and pressing them down. This is a prime example of what happens if you don't lay the tint perfectly flat on the outside. You're going to try and put it in and it's just simply not going to stick. All of the bubbles that you had on the outside will show up on the inside. So here is the final attempt. You can see me pushing the side fingers up to the center of the top or the bottom and then heating them from there. So after trying a lot and failing a lot, and yeah, this is turning out to be a lot better, and shrinking really is the most important step when it comes to windshield. With other types of tints, you can neglect it a little bit, but this is really important when you have larger sheets. So now after doing this for around an hour and a half to 2 hours, I have my finished product here. Unfortunately, I made a couple small creases near the bottom, but they're so small that when I put the tint in the inside of the windshield, they won't be noticeable almost at all, and it'll be okay. So now I put the towels down on the inside, sprayed the inside of the windshield, and then sprayed the outside sticky adhesive part of the film. This rear windshield is so hard to put on because the space in the back of this car is so tight. If you're unable to take out the rear seats very easily, I definitely recommend getting a super long squeegee. That helped me squeegee out and lay flat the bottom of the windshield film a lot easier. And if you want to see what it looks like from the inside tinting, it's not pretty. If you're able to fold down the back seats, that'll definitely help a ton. So now it's time to show the finished results. So here's the Cadillac in its final form for now. I love how much the polarized tint on the windshield stands out. Here's what it looked like before, and of course this is what it looks like after. Here's the before of my mother's Q60, and then here's the after with all the side windows tinted and the rear windshield. And finally just the front side windows on the Jeep. Here's the before, and then here's the after. Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. And if you want to check out my nonprofit I started through my school, check out the link in the description. I'll most likely be doing a lot of tint there. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. See ya.